Hi, greetings, it's me, Dr. Paul Gerhardt, and today I want to talk about speeches that persuade. This is one of the most common speeches out there, and whether or not you're thinking about your workplace or doing something for career-giving speeches or having a conversation with friends and family, this is some skills for you to gain and consider honing as you are growing your career and growing older. So let's get right into this. What are the different types of persuasive speeches? Well, generally speaking, there are disputed facts speeches, beliefs and values speeches, action and policy speeches. We have to consider the nature of persuasion itself, and so we'll talk a little bit about influence, motivation, and persuasion, the concept, and about how attitudes play a role into this, and interpersonal responses to persuasion. We're going to talk about some routes that you may take for effective persuasion, including improving perceptions of credibility, appeals to human needs, engaging the consistency principle, using both sides of persuasion, using evidence and logical reasoning. We're going to talk a little bit about organizing your persuasive speech. There's both natural order and a both sides method. And we're going to talk about speaker integrity, being communicationally sensitive, culpable ignorance, affording clues and choice. And then finally, we're going to sum up talking about democracy and demagoguery. So let's get right into it. So disputed facts of speech are really important to consider. Let's talk about facts. Facts are actions, events, conditions. These are things that have been properly observed, described, classified, and reported. We can use these in order to help move people to understanding what it is that you're talking about and believing things from the perspective that you'd like them to believe. Talking about beliefs, you have to consider values of other people. You don't necessarily ask the audience to take action, although it really is kind of implied. It should include facts and information, and sometimes you have to rely on emotions. Our emotions make us move us to do things a little bit differently, and so that's what the best speakers know. And as you know, I've been giving public presentations for over 20 years, and I've had my fair share of really great speeches and my fair share of mediocre speeches, so you can learn from both my mistakes and from my experience. So hopefully you find this presentation helpful. Let's talk about action and policy speeches. These are designed to move people to action and often deals with controversial topics. You have to demonstrate a need or a problem that really calls for a solution. And you have to remember that the perspective of your audience is going to really affect how people decide things. So keep in mind who your audience is and speak in terms that can be related to your audience so that they can relate to you. Influence is important. So this is about power that you have over a person, of course, and it helps them be able to understand events that are happening, and you need to be able to understand how they can affect the events either directly or indirectly. People must be motivated to see things differently, act or believe things differently. And there's been lots of research done that helps us understand why we are motivated. And generally speaking, these are about survival, security, satisfaction, and stimulation. Sometimes there's a deficiency in motivation, and this is characterized by needs to avoid danger, threat, disruption, and discomfort. There's such a thing as abundancy motivation, and this is characterized by a desire to grow, discover, create, enjoy, and achieve. And then motivation must be considered that is immoral, not necessarily concerned with right or wrong, fair or unfair. Let's talk more about persuasion. Persuasion simply is a change process resulting mostly from shared symbolic thinking activities. It affects thoughts and behaviors, the sociology, of the receivers. Messages attempt to influence how receivers choose or decide which information to process and respond to. The persuader has an ethical responsibility for strategies and social consequences. Techniques are ethical unless they're dishonest, unfair to the facts, or subtle that give no clue to the receiver. And nonviolent means of ethically influencing and motivating others through messages and arguments must be clearly to protect the receiver's right to choice. So the concept of attitude really is important. You have to understand what an attitude is, because it really helps us understand why people do what they do. Attitude simply is the thinking, feeling, and behavioral intentions that govern one's predispositions toward people, situations, and things. It's a tendency to respond in a specific given way. A response may be cognitive, that's how one thinks; affective, how one feels; or behavioral, how one behaves or intends to behave. One is persuaded by logical appeals. Messages focused on reasoning. Emotional appeals are messages focused on feelings and emotions. So our attitudes maintain and promote our value systems. You can always see people's values in their attitude. And it relates to their self-identity, the way that people see themselves. Most people do things out of self-interest, or what we call egoism, which is a major motivator of all human conduct. Attitudes really are underlaid by our belief systems. Our beliefs are a set of inferences we make about the world, and they're non-evaluative. From a reference point, these things anchor us for succeeding in our judgments. And we often have a tendency for assimilating things in contrast, which is applied to an attitude change. So in order to see things differently, we have to have our attitudes change. So we need to feel like we want to do things differently and believe different things about things. And so that's what a good speaker does. You know, he helps recognize that how you see things affects what we do, which affects what you get. You've watched other videos, you've probably heard me say that phrase over and over again. It really is powerful. We have to consider the cognition response theory. This helps us show how people may respond to a persuasive message by evoking thoughts from their own experiences and knowledge that may not be contained in the message. If a cognitive response is in agreement with the persuader, they should promote the message. If cognitive responses disagree, the purpose may be defeated or inhibited. So we really have to be aware of how people are responding to things, watching the body language, and being able to help make sure that we're giving the right message so that people can change their attitude. So think of an arrow of persuasions. What is your targeted response? You need to make sure that you know that if you want people to believe something differently or do something differently, you have to appeal to their emotions. And we do this with both evidence and reasoning. So you have to be able to paint the picture for people using the right words to help people come to the conclusions that they should feel differently about that. And you support that by being credible and ethical. So make sure that you are looking at ethics, credibility, evidence, reasoning, attention to emotional appeal, and if you do that, you'll be right on target. Let's talk about credibility then. This is the receiver's acceptance of or disposition toward the source. I always think it's a powerful thing to have you be introduced as an expert. You know, give some specific examples of why you're talking on the topic. You have that filled out in your biography if you're presenting things personally. I know a lot of people who try to be persuasive. They say things like, well, I have lots of experience doing that, or my long career of doing this says this. And that, to some people, will help people have a little more credibility in order for for people to be looking at things a little bit differently. Aha, this person knows what they're talking about. So your credibility is really important. Part of your credibility to consider is your character. This is the audience perception of your honesty and trustworthiness. Your competence. This is the audience's perception of the speaker's skills, ability, and knowledge. And then charisma. This is the speaker's personality that is seen by the audience as attractive, engaging, and dynamic. And it really is important. So again, you must be seen as credible. You must be seen as having high honest and trustworthy character. You must be seen as competent, and you must be seen as charismatic. You get credibility, according to Aristotle, by the goodwill and morals that you have to be able to create a perception that your intent appears to influence credibility and that you are credible. And people's perception of you must be positive. So in ethical situations, you want to be able to improve your perception of credibility. You must think about possibly using humor or satire. You must really understand people's attitudes in order to be able to change those attitudes. You need to make sure that you leave a good impression, and so make sure that you are dressing for success. You are making sure that you are presenting information in a way that is seen as credible. So your goal is to persuade people, and so really recognize where people are at and get them to move from where they're at to the next level. Pathos, according to Aristotle, is the appeal to the emotions or motivations of the audience. Motivation is really powerful when you can get people to change their emotions or evoke emotions about things. Maslow in the 1950s wrote a really thick book on how to motivate humans, and essentially he classified 5 human needs, and they start with physiological needs. This is about self-preservation. Safety needs, that's about security and stability. Love or belongingness, approval, acceptance. Esteem is about self-respect, recognition, status, dignity. And then self-actualization, which is about self-fulfillment, adequacy, competence, naturalness, and then creativeness. So each of these things we can help impart when we're giving our speeches. So from a physiological need, we have to consider comfort, sexual attraction, physical enjoyment, hunger, activity, rest, and sleep, and we can appeal to these things in our presentations. Safety needs like fear, conformity, companionship, saving, conflict, and cleanliness. Love needs loyalty, family, affection, sympathy, mothering, respect for deity, sentiments. Self-esteem is about pride, reputation, power, achievement, social distinction, appearance. And then self-actualization is about creativeness, curiosity, constructiveness, ambition, independence, freedom from restraint. So we have to consider the engaging the consistency principle. We have to consider dissonance, which is ill-fitting, inconsistent thoughts. Cognitive dissonance is ill-fitting, inconsistent relationships among our thoughts and beliefs. And then the very theory of cognitive dissonance, which is the existence of dissonance being psychologically uncomfortable. This will motivate the people to try to reduce the dissonance and achievement consonance. When dissonance is present, in addition to trying to reduce it, the person will actively avoid situations and information that would likely increase dissonance. So, helping people see both sides of the persuasion can be very important to be able to take people from where they are to moving them to the other side. So in order to do so, you have to present arguments, both pros and cons, about the point being made. This can be more effective than giving only the argument supporting the point being made. Audiences previously persuaded by both sides of the argumentation are more resistant to counter-persuasion than those persuaded with one-sided arguments. And you have to consider people's sense of being rational. So some characteristics of objectivity: suspended judgment, non-specific opponents, critical willingness, qualified language, audience sensitivity, ethical conduct. A speaker really should try to establish some common ground when they're persuading both sides. Using evidence and logical reasoning is really all about being able to critically think. Support your ideas with valid evidence. Use logic. And arrange it in a way that makes sense. So people naturally do something called reflective thinking. You have to use this to your advantage. This is about attention and awareness. It's about recognition of a problem and a need. It's about sorting of objections and counterplans in search of the best solution. It's about working, visualizing, and proposed solution, and evaluation and solutions leading to acceptance or rejection. So really helping people understand that they're going to be thinking about things, make it easy for people to go through the reflection process as you are presenting your speech. And you can do this by a natural common thinking order. Help people do things step by step by step by step. Bring them down the pathway from point A to point Z. So we do this, we can change people's attitudes and beliefs. You get their attention, you understand the need, you find ways to satisfy people. We're always creating things twice in our minds, so we have to have people understand and be able to visualize things before they take action. And so you can help them do this by understanding the process. And so you might use Monroe's motivated sequence by setting things up in a way that makes sense. You're leading people down the path. And so take out a piece of paper and write these things down. In your introduction, you want to preview the persuasive intent in your introduction. Gain attention of the audience, reveal the theme or thesis from which your entire speech flows, to which your requested action is tied, signify the importance or significance of this subject to the audience, establish credibility of yourself, and then preview the persuasive intent of your organization. So in the introduction, capture our attention, tell us what we're talking about, pique our attention. In the body, that's where you present the need. You have to give a statement of the nature of the problem itself. It's helpful if you have an illustration of the problem with any relevant detailed examples. And discuss any ramifications of this. Show the extent of the problem with the statistics and testimony. And then point out the personal implications for the audience members. The what's in it for me that moves people to take changes. Satisfy the problem with the solution. State the attitude, belief, or action you want the audience to to take on. Give an explanation. Make your proposal understanding with examples and visual aids. There's a theoretical demonstration. Show the logical connection between the problem and the solution. Reference the practical experience. Show where your proposal or a similar one has worked in the past or similar situations. Meet objections. Reveal how the proposal outcomes can be anticipated. Visualize the results. With the positive method, describe what the future will look like if your solution is adopted. The negative method, on the other hand, describes what the future will look like if your solution is not adopted. And then there's the contrast method, where you compare and contrast what the future will look like if the solution is not adopted and how that differs from the adoption of the solution. In the conclusion, you have to request the action. Call for overt action, attitude, or belief with which you want the audience members to comply. This is a good place to include a summary of your points, reminding your audience why they could comply, state personal intention to act accordingly, and then end with an impact. Easy enough, right? So there's a lot there. You can play that back and write that down if you need to. Consider the natural order. In the psychological order, you're creating attention and location, establishing a need. You have to recognize there must be an arousal of interest and the problem awareness by relating the need to the specific audience. You have to give an explanation of the solution in terms of the problem, the need, previous experience, knowledge, and personality of the audience. Evaluation of all important objections, counterarguments, or alternative solutions. And then finally, reinforcement of your message throughout your speech, particularly toward the end of it. Remember, people remember what you say at the start and towards the end. And you do this through verbal reminders, reviews, summaries, and then visualization. It's very important. So, using the both sides method, there are 3 ways to organize the two-sided method. Acknowledge and concede. That's the con. Present your side first. That's the pro. And repeat the con, pro order with each issue. Con, pro, and then so forth. You must be communicationally sensitive. So that means effectively and ethically matching the method being sent to the requirements of the receiver's situation and the context. This gives a measure of your willingness to carefully consider the psychological environment before encoding your messages. It's the ability to judge public and interpersonal encounters accurately. Your ability to sense when to be rhetorically sensitive or assertive. And then there's culpable ignorance, and that's ignorance that comes from carelessness, and that's where the blame is. So affording clues and choice. It is unethical to conceal real purpose, organization represented, or to pretend to speak objectively when one is really an advocate of one point of view. You are helping people make decisions. Use emotional appeals, and so this can detract from the truth if you are not careful. You want to make sure that your sense of ethics is not questioned. You have to be absolutely honest about things, because there will always be an ethical argument that clearly counters the one that could be concluded from listening to you. So you have to be aware of that. You need to give things a fair hearing. And that's when receivers have the obligation to seek out clues and choices to questions and clarify. And giving a fair hearing really helps people make the best decisions possible. Receivers must analyze their range of acceptance. So avoid lies and using false facts. You really are responsible for telling the truth. You can't afford to damage your character. You're your own character manager. You shouldn't do things on a false pretense. Don't mislead others about your qualifications. And you can't make unsupported personal attacks. So you could be legally prosecuted for slander or libel if you do it in writing. So be aware that demagoguery is free speech turned to license with irresponsible rhetoric. In doing so, this injures and threatens the integrity of any speech-making subsystem, as well as social, political, and legal systems. Demagogues were Hitler and Mussolini, for instance, and the use of outright lies, manufactured facts, and dirty tricks that truly is unethical. You don't want to damage your own reputation. Always be honest. So I've given you a lot of information about doing persuasive speeches. And the more that you consider how you communicate all the facts and figures of your speech really is important in being able to move people to be able to see things differently where they get different results. All right, everyone. Thank you so much for your valuable time. I hope you've taken something away of this of value. And more than anything else, I hope that you have a great day, because only you get to choose how you feel about it. I'm Dr. Paul Gerhardt.